I think we've got a problem in this country where Nigel Farage says jump and Keir Starmer says how high. You're never going to appease the right by slowly moving towards the right. They just get worse and they drag the government with them.
In a way, the Greens in winning have invited the kind of scrutiny that people like me have wanted the Greens to face for a long time. This is a party now that's sectarian, that wants to legalise hard drugs, that has attitudes on transgender issues that are way outside of the mainstream.
We're used to talking about whether Labour and the Lib Dems should hook up. Are we edging towards a world in which we'll start talking about whether Labour and the Conservatives should? Hello and welcome to The Forecast. Something massive is happening. The words of the Green Party's new MP, Hannah Spencer, after her decisive win in the Gorton and Denton by-election. Is she right? Labour came a distant third, and neither the Conservatives nor the Liberal Democrats managed to get even 2% of the vote. Arguably, none of that was unexpected, but Reform UK, up until now seen as the populist insurgents ready to replace the mainstream parties, fell short by over 4,000 votes. Not nearly the knife-edge result that was predicted. So is Nigel Farage in danger of running out of steam after diluting his party with Tory defectors? Could the Greens offer white working-class voters a left alternative to kick the establishment? And is Labour going to have to move left, whether to take on the Green threat or their unhappy backbenchers? I'm joined now by the ex-Tory, now Reform commentator Tim Montgomery. Sam White is a former Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer, and Natalie Bennett is one of two Green peers in the House of Lords. But first, I've been speaking to her boss, Zack Palansky, in Manchester, just after his party's win. First of all, tell me, how and why do you think you won? Who did you win over?
Well, it's been phenomenally exciting to win this by-election. I think there's a couple of factors. I think number one, which can't be underestimated, is Hannah Spencer was just a phenomenal candidate, and she'll be a brilliant MP, and I can't wait for the country to see that. More widely, though, I think her message and the message of the Green Party to lower people's bills, to fund the National Health Service, and rebuild our public services was immensely popular. And then finally, I think it's the political moment we're in, which is the Labour government have absolutely collapsed because they have no alternatives to change people's material conditions, the threat of a Reform Party and an extreme candidate. So people were looking for hope and a plan, and I think that's exactly what the Green Party offer.
But what lesson are you going to take from this? Do you think the lesson from Hannah Spencer is that you can actually win people over from Reform as well as from Labour? You know, she was a white working-class 34-year-old plumber.
I think that's partly the message. The biggest learning, though, I think, is this was our 127th target seat. And actually that demonstrates that there's no-go areas for the Green Party. And the starting gun has been fired because in 70 days, there's local elections right across England and Wales, including the Senedd. And actually, where we have a good candidate, we're resourced, we have volunteers on the ground, we can challenge both Labour and indeed the Reform Party by offering the alternative, which is the Green Party. And I think that's immensely exciting for British politics, especially as we're about to hit 200,000 members.
So does this by-election change your national ambitions?
It definitely does change our national ambitions, but those have been changing all the time anyway. To give some context, when I was elected leader of the Green Party on September the 2nd, during that leadership campaign, we had about 55,000 members. As I said, we're about to hit 200,000. We've also tripled in the opinion polls. But I think I did an interview with you where you said, this is all very good, but does it mean you can win elections? And I think my answer then was, I don't know. I believe so, I'm confident, but we're going to have to prove it. Well, we've now proved it in spades. We had nearly 2,000 volunteers on the ground yesterday and a 4,000 majority in what was once considered a very safe Labour seat. That doesn't mean we won't continue to work hard. It doesn't mean there won't still be challenges. But what I would say is that level of ambition has rapidly increased very quickly.
Labour and the Tories are both attacking you as extremists. As people who tried to sweep up the Muslim vote in this very unusual constituency by pressing the point on Gaza. And that, A, that doesn't translate to every seat in the country, but B, it takes us into a new era of divisive, they say, sectarian politics.
I think those are deeply cynical attack lines from both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. We've seen a genocide in Gaza that has been ongoing for years now. It's not just me that's calling it a genocide, that's also including genocide scholars, organisations like Amnesty International and various human rights organisations. So I think it's really important that we're morally consistent on that. On top of that, I think it's important to say I'm a Jewish man, and one of 5 Jewish people have been in leadership positions in British politics. You don't have to be Muslim to care about a genocide that is going on. I think this affects Muslim communities, Jewish communities, non-faith communities. I think anyone who cares about morality and humanity has shown moral consistency in saying they don't want to vote for a party that is complicit or actively enabling that. That's not the only conversations we were having on the ground. People were largely concerned about their bills and lowering their bills, but it is also true that people have deep concerns about the actions of this Labour government that were also ongoing under the Conservative government too.
But I suppose that, this constituency is very unusual, isn't it? That, it had, a half of it in which it looked like Reform could have won, and a half of it in which you clearly did extremely well. And I'm wondering what the lesson is for the general election there. Does this mean that the red wall seats that look like they might go Reform are still out of your reach?
Well, I think that's a preconception, first of all, that was demonstrated wrong by the data yesterday. Actually, we found ourselves performing very strongly in Denton as well as Gorton. For those who don't know Denton, that primarily is made up of a more white working class population, although, of course, people live all over in all constituencies. I think every constituency is going to be unique in its own way, but I think the values I'm talking about are pretty universal, which is challenging multimillionaires and billionaires, challenging power and wealth, and actually investing in our communities, investing in bringing people together, and investing in unity rather than division. I think we've got a problem in this country where Nigel Farage says jump and Keir Starmer says how high. You're never going to appease the right by slowly moving towards the right. They just get worse and they drag the government with them. And that would be fine. I wouldn't be bothered, apart from they're the government of this country and they're dragging us all down with them. And what the Green Party are being very clear on are issues like migration. If you have a migrant worker who comes to this country, they are so much more likely to put more money in tax than they ever take out in benefits. We very rarely hear these stories, though. We rarely hear the fact that there are lots of vacancies in our National Health Service. Of course, we should be training British workers. But frankly, while we've got those skills gaps, we should also be welcoming migrants too, who will be here and working and paying off our pensions, for instance. I think all of these things are stories that need to be told, but so rarely do you ever hear these, certainly not from the Labour government, and they keep pushing towards reform's direction. What the Green Party intend to do, and I think we just did last night, is pull the whole centre of discourse over to the left, and you can reject the labels left and right. Really what I'm talking about here is common sense and making sure we're looking after communities rather than the super wealthy.
It seems likely that Labour could move to the left, though, amidst all of this. There may be a change of leader. The soft left seem in the ascendancy in the Labour Party. Might they win some of those voters back?
Well, there's a couple of things here. First of all, if the Labour Party did start to move to the left, sure, that might make my job a little bit more difficult as Green Party leader, but actually, frankly, as a citizen of this country, I'd absolutely applaud that and look to work with them on that. That being said, I don't think there's any evidence that's the direction the Labour Party are going to move, and I think they'll probably learn all the wrong lessons from this. This is the same Labour Party that wanted to slash disability benefits, that eventually lifted the 2-child benefit cap. It took them over 18 months. Now, all of that, I would say, is a pretty unholy mess. And it may be that some Labour leader comes in and changes it all. But I don't see who that person is, because actually, every time there's been a Labour leadership election, anyone who's even on the soft left, as you put it, doesn't even make it on the ballot paper. And I think we're at the point where the Labour Party are so corporate captured by vested interests, be it oil and gas, arms companies, gambling companies, private healthcare companies, that we're never going to see a leader of the Labour Party who is actually for the people rather than profit. But that's exactly why the Green Party exists. We exist to say we don't need to accept the slop that the Labour Party offer, and we can reject the politics of division that Reform offer and actually give people hope in the plan.
What if they actually asked you to work with them? Could the Greens and the Labour Party work together under different leadership, obviously? If they said, come and join us, we'll be the progressive coalition that stops Reform. Would you be interested?
I mean, I'm always keen to work with anyone who shares my values and wants to campaign on cross-party issues. I'm a pluralist at heart. The party is that too. And so I think it's impossible to hypothesise. I always want to answer direct questions, but we know there are lots of Labour MPs, and there's only a couple of them I could imagine that would take the Labour Party in a direction where we could possibly work with them. I can't imagine in any scenario where they will eventually be Labour Party leader, but sure, I'd never rule things out. That would be a silly thing to do, and so I'll be watching closely. But actually, that's not my focus. My focus right now is on winning more by-elections, winning the council seats in 70 days' time, and getting our first Senedd members in Wales, including Anthony Slaughter and Tessa Marshall, who will make history in Wales by being our first ever Green elected representation on the Senedd.
Just finally, do you see any parallels or similarities between your movement and Nigel Farage where he was some time ago, in that You know, he had this radical idea to leave the European Union, which everybody said, well, that's bonkers, it's never going to happen. You have some pretty far-out ideas there as well, you know, in terms of possibly leaving NATO, which people say, well, this is terribly irresponsible and, you know, it should never happen. Do you think that with time, the ideas that you're espousing that people say are crazy could become mainstream?
Well, there's two things to unpack there. The first thing is, I would say what is crazy, if we're going to use that term, is continuing to view Donald Trump as an ally. This is a man who has threatened to annex Greenland, one of our supposed NATO allies. That would trigger Article 5, which means an attack on one is an attack on all. And actually what I've been saying is we should be having conversations and dialogue with our European neighbours. I think Brexit has been an absolute disaster, both culturally and economically. And actually we should be working with our neighbours to actually deal with the threat of Donald Trump in the same way that we're dealing with the threat of Vladimir Putin or Benjamin Netanyahu. I think it's about recognising who the authoritarians are in our world, and I would consider Donald Trump one of them. So that's the first thing on the kind of substance of the issue. To the wider point, I don't see a lot of parallels with Nigel Farage. This is a man who claims to be a man of the people, but he's a man of the wealthy people. Sure, he managed to make Brexit happen from outside Parliament, and so I suppose there's a comparison to be made there in terms of I think it's important to both be in Parliament, but also, frankly, I think there's a lot of work to be done within our communities. But I don't really see Nigel Farage doing that. I see him going on right-wing news channels and grifting.
Zack Palansky, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Right, well, Tim Montgomery, pick that up. I mean, has Nigel Farage sort of hit a rough patch? You know, do you think welcoming in Jenrick and Suella Braverman has been a mistake that has maybe been, you know, found out in this?
Well, two things, because I'd like to respond to that interview with one big observation in a minute as well. But if the result that was achieved by Reform yesterday in that by-election was repeated across the country, Reform would have a majority in Parliament. The swing was such in a seat. So I think Zack Palansky said that was the 127th Green target seat. It's the 480th Reform target seat. So it was always uphill for us to win that seat. So we're on track insofar as, you know, this stage of the Parliament, anyone's on track. And look,
couldn't they say that as well, though? I mean, if Zack Palansky said, well, if there was I don't know what the swing to the Greens was, but it was enormous.
It was enormous.
If that was repeated across the country, we'd be, you know, we'd have a majority.
No, they would have 100 if all the swings that happened yesterday were repeated, they would have 100 MPs.
Yes, so it was kind of nonsense.
We would have over 400 MPs. So it would not have happened in most seats. Denton and Gorton is an unusual constituency. The other thing is, obviously, I would have much preferred Reform to win than the Greens. But very close members of my family voted Green at the last general election. And they voted because they thought the Green Party was a Green Party, an environmental party. And I think Zack Palansky very briefly mentioned oil and gas interests in a partial answer to one of your questions. But there was nothing on climate change, nothing on the environment. What the Green Party now is a left-wing party. That's clear. Fair enough. But people in the shires who traditionally voted Greens, who would normally vote Conservative but were attracted to conservation, they have got to realise that this is a party now that's sectarian, that wants to legalise hard drugs, that has attitudes on transgender issues that are way outside of the mainstream. And so, in a way, the Greens in winning have invited the kind of scrutiny that people like me have wanted the Greens to face for a long time. You ask hard questions of Reform, quite rightly. Now need to start asking really hard questions about Green Party, because I think a lot of the Muslim voters in Manchester yesterday who voted for the Greens, were they aware of quite how radical the Greens are on some of these issues? I don't think so, not at all. And when, you know, Natalie was leader of the Green Party, she didn't talk in these terms. Natalie,
yes, I did.
You spoke about the environment nearly all the time because that was what most motivated you. What's most motivated your traditional voters? That was a completely different offering.
I mean, the thing about Tories who might vote Green,
yeah,
they might also be people who regard Reform as sectarian and as racist.
Well,
and that's why they go Green rather than Reform.
Yeah. Well, we weren't the party in the yesterday's by-election who were using non-English language leaflets, painting a picture. Why was that Modi image in the middle of a party election broadcast. They were trying to appeal to Muslim voters who maybe don't like it originally from Pakistan, who don't like what India is doing to Muslim community. It was a sectarian campaign. So if you're talking about division, Krishnan, I know which party yesterday was campaigning most divisively.
Politics
and it wasn't reform.
Well, I think let me answer specifically that question about why the Modi image. That was Narendra Modi with Sir Keir Starmer. That was making the point about the government's relationships with authoritarian regimes.
Oh, come on. No. Don't treat us as idiots. You know why you did it.
That reflects what's always been Green Party positions. You know, I challenge the fact. People, when I was elected leader in 2012, said, oh, she's changing the Greens. She's moving away from the environment. She's talking about social issues. I was majoring, for example, on a real living wage. The Green Party has always understood that economic and environmental justice are indivisible. So that's a core part of our philosophical basis.
You've chosen sort of Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities over Indian communities in that respect, because obviously calling Modi an authoritarian when he's it's a democratic country is a big choice.
We call Trump an authoritarian. I was in the House of Lords yesterday talking about concerns about America using undue pressure on British business, on the British government, as an authoritarian government. These are things that the Greens have always stood up for. You go right back in the day, we were the people who stood up for the Tibetans against the Chinese government. I've been very regularly talking about Jimmy Lai and the situation in Hong Kong. This is the natural Green position, standing up for human rights and the rule of law all around the world.
Tim, I mean, is this the choice you think that Britain is edging towards? It's reform versus the left and currently the Greens?
Well, look, that it's an incredible... Let me answer it almost taking my reform hat off for a minute, because it's what worries me, actually, in some sense. And I think it's the biggest thing that's happening in our politics. We've got used to the fact that the Tory party and the Labour Party are now polling so badly. You add up the Tories and Labour together now, in almost every opinion poll we've had for 6 months, and they don't, between them, get more than 40%. We have a splintering now in our politics, almost like a consumerization of politics.
Isn't that good? Isn't that people getting the chance to vote for who they like?
Yes, that's of course a good sign, and I welcome that people can vote for reform. But the problem is that people, you could start winning elections in constituencies as a party that some might regard as extreme on 25% of the vote. When you have 5 or 6 parties competing, which we will in lots of seats in the next election, the unpredictability of elections in a first-past-the-post system is, the first-past-the-post system is being tested to the extreme now. And it may produce some really unusual results.
So is reform still in favour of proportional representation?
I am not in favour of proportional representation, but if we are moving to a permanent system of 5 or 6 party politics, I will have to recognise that first past the post is no longer fit for purpose.
Sam,
I'm willing to give that up yet, but I'm heading that way, yeah.
Sam, I mean, do you think this is the emerging choice? I mean, Keir Starmer said today, he's against extremism on the left and right, and that's what he sees these two parties as. But they're doing well.
Yeah, I think it'd be churlish not to congratulate the Greens on the victory in the by-election last night. I've been listening to sort of Tim and Natalie going head-to-head and enjoying it very much. Tim rightly points out that under Zack Palansky, the Greens are now a left populist party. Natalie fires back that Reform is a right populist party. They're both right. What do we know about populist parties? You consult any of the major studies, 120 years, 60 countries, they always show the same thing. You vote populist left, you vote populist right, it always makes you poorer as a country. So anyone here who's prioritising quality of public services or cares a damn about cost of living issues, very simple, can't vote Reform, can't vote Green.
That historical argument just doesn't work anymore,
well,
does it?
It's not
because we haven't
argument,
really
Christian,
had this kind of choice before. And there haven't been great comparisons to make. You can't say, well, look what they did, in Germany or France, and and it's all gone wrong.
You're saying disregard 120 years of academic research across 60 countries.
Yeah. We're in a different world now.
We're in a different world in this country in that we now have parties on the populist left and populist right who are doing very well in the polls and winning by-elections. But it doesn't change the nature of what a populist government is. It always, 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 and in all cases, makes people poorer over the long term.
Can I just briefly respond to that? Because the trouble with what Sam says, and I used to be on your side in a way because I was a conservative, is what is so unusual about this period in time, and I think it raises profound questions about our politics, is that we have seen the Conservative and the Labour parties fail at the same time. And people do not feel better off, even under the mainstream parties. And it isn't just Britain, so you can't just blame Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. It's happening in most Western countries. There is a deep unease about how government and politics operate. So why I think it is different this time, and is probably a permanent phenomenon, is it's not just a British phenomenon. The Greens and sort of populist parties across Europe are on the march. There is something that's happened in the way democratic politics works and advanced Western societies don't work that isn't going to go away.
But this is not unprecedented. The last time we had a really radical shift in politics was the election of Margaret Thatcher and Reagan in the States.
Yeah. Blair
was the child of Thatcher. Cameron was the child of Blair. I'm not quite sure what Boris Johnson was, but let's park that to one side. And then, Sir Keir is the child of Blair. Yeah. So we've been stuck in this pattern, which is now clearly a failed pattern. And, it's time for a change. The election of Thatcher was a big radical change. This is a time for another change.
Sam, I mean, the question is how Labour should respond. And at the moment, it's just, well, we carry on. And carrying on is losing, is the trouble. And so that's not going to work, is it?
No, I mean, and to go back to sort of answer this question through Natalie's analysis, I don't see it as that continuation. I think we had a big break following the global financial crisis, from which we have seen a lot of repercussions. You immediately had a Conservative government that deliberately and consistently did not invest in productive economy, which we always could see was going to hold down productivity, hold down growth, hold down living standards. We've seen no increase in earnings per person since 2008. And then you compound it with the second great mistake of the last 50 years, Brexit, which everyone who's looking at the evidence and paying attention said would make us poorer for the long term. And sure enough, it's delivered exactly that. We are poorer. So we have a combination of Tim Montgomery and Nigel Farage's Brexit strategy with the Tories squeezing the productive investment out of the economy strategy. That's 15 years where this country has been dragged backwards. And I think the biggest mistake this government has made, and its original sin, is it has always underestimated the scale of the damage done over the last 15 years and has totally underprepared the public for quite how difficult and quite how long this turnaround operation is going to be.
Because it was criticised for saying everything was terrible in those first few months. We had that series of sort of announcements by cabinet ministers saying it's all grim, and people saying, well, this is all going a bit too far now. But you're saying they didn't go far enough.
Exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying there was a brief moment in a rose garden where Keir Starmer levelled with the public and said, guys, it is really bad. It's going to get worse before it gets better. It's a decade of recovery. And as you say, Christian, suddenly everyone said, we don't really like this message. And the government panicked and abandoned it and basically said, Britain's not as broken as you think. And as soon as you say that, you are owning the problems inherited from the last government.
So what now?
So I think it's not, when we say bold and action, it's not a question of spiralling left or spiralling right. It's actually about bold reform in the centre based on evidence. I'm a huge fan of evidence-based policy making, right? I know how to do a good soundbite. I know how to make something sound great in a press release. That is absolutely irrelevant to whether it works in practice on the ground.
Tim, I mean, isn't there a danger for you that the grievances that have done very well for reform might just not be so bad in 2 or 3 years' time? Interest rates down, mortgage costs down, inflation down, net immigration down. They're processing the asylum logs. They might get somewhere with the boats if they can make this French deal work. All of a sudden, things are starting to look a little. It's a big if, I give you that. But what I mean is, things may not look quite so bad in 2 or 3 years' time. And
if they don't, I welcome that. I want the best for my country. I believe in the country, but I don't think they will look profoundly different. And taking Sam's starting point of the stock market crash, at that time, if you looked at the GDP per head of the average European country, including Britain and America, we were basically almost at the same point. We've now fallen about 20% behind. So I don't think that's going to quickly turn around in 5 years. No. Now, what is the fundamental reason? Talk about evidence-based. What is the fundamental reason that has happened? Well, one of the reasons is you look at the energy prices in Europe compared to America. America, they've fracked, they've invested in cheaper energy, and they've begun to see manufacturing and other industries recover. They've begun to see the economy become much more competitive. They can have the AI investment that is driving. We, on the other hand, our energy prices in Britain, which the Green Party would make even worse, we have the most expensive energy in the Western world. So we haven't actually contributed.
But it will be the cheapest once it's all gone renewable.
Yeah.
And it'll be stable.
No, renewable energy is the future. I absolutely believe in renewable energy. But the evidence is it is advancing so fast. Ed Miliband has just done 25-year auctions so that we are going to be stuck with the renewable energy technology now for 25 years. In 5-7 years, renewable energy technologies are advancing so fast they're going to be much cheaper. We have made a bet on using current energy for understandable reasons. Climate change is an urgent problem, but we are now saddled with incredibly expensive energy for 25 years. Whereas if we were a little bit more pragmatic about a real problem, we wouldn't be saddled with those costs.
The choice is between no investment in the energy infrastructure and things being a little bit cheaper, or investment and the costs go on to the consumer. Because we haven't invested so long, the only choice is to invest. So you have a straight up choice. Do you rebuild the sort of 1950s infrastructure and go coal, oil, gas, all the stuff which is dependent on Russia and others, or do you build, free use renewable energy? Both of them are going to require massive investment in the infrastructure system and the transmission network, right? So this higher cost that we're paying is a function of failing to invest in the 90s
Natalie,
and other times.
I mean, can you address Tim's original point, which is that this is not something you're really talking about? And it is an area across which you can reach the whole country and the political spread.
It's just simply not true to say that we're not talking about this. I talk about this. We all talk about this in Parliament on a daily basis.
Only after being Tim did.
Zack didn't talk about it in that interview.
I come back to the point that economic and environmental justice are indivisible. But more than that, I want to come to the point. I'm going to absolutely agree with you that Brexit was economically and more than that socially disastrous. It has made the young people losing the right of freedom of movement.
Straight away, you had about 20 seconds on the environment and immediately wanted to change the subject again, proving the point.
You might let me finish the sentence and the paragraph first to see where I'm going.
Okay.
So Brexit made us much poorer all over the place. We can agree on that. Austerity was terrible. I was the person who was saying we have to stop making the poor, the disabled, the young pay for the greed and fraud of the bankers. Where I utterly split with you is the idea that what we were doing in the 1990s and 2000s was success. That was what produced the financial crash. That's what produced that trashed the planet. That produced the fracking in America. That is what produced what we have now. So we have to have radical change. Centrist politics is dead because it means leave things much as they are. And it's a broken model. It's the model of Epstein and Mandelson.
That is a pathetic attempt to link it to Epstein.
But Sam, how is the Labour Party going to resist the parliamentary party and the unions dragging it to the left now and saying the only way we can respond to this is to try and tackle the green challenge?
I mean, Christian, you're right. There is a problem. I think now parts of the Labour Party would like to move to the left. Personally, I don't think that's the answer to almost any of the problems the country faces. I do disagree with the characterisation of the 90s and 2000s as not working. It was the longest period of sustained growth, real living standards improving, public services at the highest level of public satisfaction, shortest waiting list of the NHS ever. Pretty much every indicator improved over that period.
And that created the world we have now.
No, the Industrial Revolution went back somewhat further than the late 1990s, and the aggregation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is the cause of climate change, which is a real problem and needs addressing. The Labour government, you're talking about the Blair government, was one of the first to take some real serious action on climate change, including introducing the Climate Change Act, which I know Tim's a big fan of.
It is worth pointing out, of course, then that was total cross-party agreement, which shows you how much the right of politics has changed.
It's true. It was one of the great successes of that period was there was a consensus on climate change and the need to take real action. And I'd love to see those days.
It's one of the great successes that we did nothing to actually reduce climate change emissions, but we did export all of our manufacturing industry to China, where they produced the same goods with greater pollution. That wasn't an achievement. It was an economic disaster for the working class communities of this country. You two agreeing on that suggests you've learned nothing.
No, the loss of manufacturing to China is not simply a function of dealing with climate change.
Partly.
Losing manufacturing to China is a problem for all Western countries to some extent or another.
Sam, as Tim, Tim sort of pushed back on my sort of suggestion that things might be feeling a little bit better in 2 or 3 years' time. I mean, if he's right about that, and or even if things are a little bit better, people don't feel it because it's still pretty marginal, and we're way behind the Americans now. Then what is the political answer for Labour? If you think it's a mistake to go to the left, then what is the answer? And do you think, it doesn't really matter who the leader is, that it's more about direction, or does the leader matter?
So I think the point you make around whether the economy picks up does matter hugely. And there's mixed picture over the last 18 months, but there's some reasonable positive news on inflation and borrowing costs coming down. That's good. I welcome that. And that could make a difference. Personally, the reason I'm a bit of a gloomster is I think serious improvements to the economy take longer than people think. So I don't know how this government manages to buy the time it needs for these productive economies to start paying off. If I was a voter in Britain right now, I would feel quite stuck. I know if I vote populist left or populist right, my wages go down, my public services go down. How can I find a government that is going to do the difficult, sensible, productive things and then give them enough time for them to pay off? I don't know how you do that at the moment.
Tim, and I asked Zack Palansky about the idea of a sort of a progressive consensus. He didn't rule it out.
No.
What if we move towards a world in which the centre starts to cooperate a bit more?
Yeah.
Labour and the Lib Dems team up a bit more. I mean, and tactical voting keeps you out of power. Do you think that's possible?
I think tactical voting is a problem for reform at the moment. There's a lot of people that regard reform as the big bogeyman in British politics. I understand that. I think what would change, and this is vindicated by Reform's internal polling, is if the Greens really do emerge as a force in British politics and they begun to become the power that Natalie would like them to be, that motivates a lot of Conservative voters who are currently a bit wary of reform, Lib Dem voters in the West Country, maybe even some centrist Labour people, to actually think if the choice is a reform sort of flavoured government or a green flavoured government, the tactical voting unwinds and it becomes as much of a problem for the left as the right. So the basic problem, I wrote an article for The Times a few years ago in which I said, we're all in the wrong parties. Because we've all got these inherited obligations. I've eventually left the Conservative Party because it didn't fit me anymore. But the thing is, we've basically been ruled in British politics for a long time by Blairites, orange bookers like Nick Clegg, and Cameroons. But they are kind of all in the different parties. And the populist left are reorganising, the populist right are reorganising, but the centre is stuck in 3 different parties. And that is the big question. I don't know how the centre can organise them, but they will start to lose elections really badly now unless they reconfigure.
Well, the thing is, Tim, I'm entirely comfortable in the party. It's the only party I've ever belonged to.
Do you think the Greens should resist the progressive consensus and stay distinct and the left-wing alternative?
Well, we're offering a hope and a plan, as Zack said. That's what we're offering to voters. Voters have just today embraced that very, very happily. We're going to take that as far and show that to as many voters. In May, we're going to see that in the London council elections around the country, the Senate, our sister party up in Scotland. Voters, I think we're going to see lots of voters embracing it, and that's then a path that we're going forward with.
Sam, I mean, we're used to talking about whether Labour and the Lib Dems should hook up. Are we edging towards a world in which we'll start talking about whether Labour and the Conservatives should?
I think lots of voters think they already have, actually.
Exactly. I think my colleagues here would like to present those 2 parties in that way. On the Lib Dems for 1 second, I feel slightly sorry for them because when I woke up this morning, the description of how this election was won, the Greens faced both ways. They pretended their easy answers to difficult questions, and they allowed the public to give a bloody nose to an unpopular government doing different things in a low-cost way. I've heard this playbook before. It's called the Lib Dems, and it's how they've won all the by-elections they have over the years. And then I remembered Zack Palansky spent most of his career as a massive Lib Dem
He spent a couple of years,
Oh,
very early on when he first got involved in politics. I met him then.
And if you haven't seen the video of him singing the glories of the Lib Dems,
brilliant.
I would hunt one out immediately after listening to this podcast, everyone, to see what kind of values Zack Palansky has. But to your core question, what about the centre? I think there is a reality, I'm not sure we're anywhere near it, where if the sort of breaking apart of the traditional electoral shapes in Britain is actually going to happen in a way where it appears to be at the moment. And I would also say, let's not get too excited. This was one by-election. But in the polls generally...
wait for May.
In the polls generally, there is something happening, which is really interesting.
And happening all over the world, which I think makes it more than one.
And if you looked at last May's elections, the smallest percentage of the vote which someone won a seat in a first-past-the-post contest was, I think, 18.7%. Like, that is crazy. We're in a world where you can have less than a fifth of the vote and win in the first past the post election. I think that is going to create new pressures on our democratic structures here. I don't know whether the answer is electoral reform in a way that we've been talking about, whether it's some parties starting to break up. What I would really like to see is a party that stood for dealing with the real problems facing the country. For me, that is things like, let's increase our defence spending to see off Russia. Let's put productivity as our first and foremost goal to actually get some growth so we can afford our public services and raising living standards and actually doing the difficult things that takes. I would welcome seeing more people coalesce around that.
We're going to talk about the threat of Russia. Let's think about security in the broader sense, not just about defence, but also think about diplomacy, which you've slashed the spending on aid money. We have to think about a more secure, stable world. And just thinking about defence, we have to think about defence, absolutely. And we have to think about defence in a world in which Trump is threatening to invade Greenland. But more than that, we need to think about this holistically. And that also means things like resilience, food security, tackling the climate emergency, dealing with the nature collapse.
We should just briefly talk, Tim, about the party that is literally not part of the conversation, which is the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Now, they were nowhere in this by-election, and they were never going to be.
Yeah.
But isn't Kemi Badenoch having something of a good time at the moment? And she's doing quite well. Sometimes it reminds me of sort of William Hague against Tony Blair, that she can do quite well against Keir Starmer, but it doesn't really
We're both getting too old remembering these periods.
Her position. But are you sure you were right to leave the Tories and that they might not come back as the right-wing alternative that isn't so extreme?
I'm sure I was right to leave the Conservative Party. Whether I was right to join Reform, I wonder about every day, because it is a high-wire act. Nothing has ever been done, to move from a few MPs to majority. So it's a high-risk project. But why I'm confident, just to answer your question, why I'm confident I left the Conservative Party was I like Kemi Badenoch. I think she's good, and she's definitely got a lot better. You're right. No impact on the Tory poll rating at all. And that's because I think the British people have a sense that the Conservative Party needs to do its porridge. It needs to explain, which it hasn't done yet, why those 14 years of Conservative government failed on their own terms. Tax went up, public services went, home ownership went up. All the things that the Conservatives said they would do or be associated with went in the wrong direction. And so I think even if Kemi Badenoch, was replaced by Jesus Christ, they had the most perfect leader, I think the Conservative Party wouldn't recover for a while. And so I back Reform, because if you're on the right of British politics, they're the only game in town for this. And there is no way the Conservative Party would even be competitive in Manchester now. They're going to go backwards in Scotland and Wales in the coming elections. They're not a national party. One thing that's interesting about both the Greens and Reform is we can compete almost everywhere.
But that also means, doesn't it, that you have to be comfortable with the kinds of things Matt Goodwin was coming out with.
Matt Goodwin would not have been my choice as candidate.
Question.
Yeah. No, I would not have selected Matt Goodwin. I have kept silent during the campaign. I regard some of his views as sulphurous. I do not think he should have been our candidate. And I think the Reform Party might have dodged a bullet in not having him as part of the parliamentary party. I think Reform needs to get much more serious about candidate selection. The Green Party candidate was brilliant. She was winsome. She was attractive. The machine behind her for a really ugly sectarian campaign.
Sorry, winsome and attractive are not the two things I would have picked out about her.
I'm sorry,
I'd have said 34-year-old white working class.
I wasn't meaning it. You're reading it in the wrong way. I was saying it was the personalities, but I wasn't.
Right,
you're misinterpreting what I was saying. She was warm. She was, she talked about her dogs. She was an attractive personality. That's what I was saying. I wasn't talking about the looks. If that was what I came across.
On where Reform is. is, and as a supporter, you've kind of got to sort of square yourself with it, is, there are things about what he said that people regarded as racist.
I think there was a ridiculous debate about whether you were English, I think, or other people.
And being supported by Tommy Robinson, that's a bit uncomfortable, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things that Nigel Farage does not get enough credit for is the fact that he's kept Tommy Robinson, out of reform and won't touch him with a barge pole. Nigel Farage polices the right in a way that Jeremy Corbyn never policed the left. And frankly, Zack Palansky isn't policing the Green Party.
But they won't condemn him now, will they?
Who?
Tommy Robinson.
Yes, they will. You get Nigel Farage on this programme, I guarantee you, any money, he would condemn Tommy Robinson, 100%. And I would. If Nigel Farage allowed Tommy Robinson into the Reform Party, I would leave the next minute. He's an unacceptable person to be in any political party.
And what do you make of the now sort of there was cheating going on thing? Because that's quite reminiscent of Trump and the Republicans. There was voter fraud going on, and let's imagine there was a little bit of voter fraud. It certainly wouldn't have been enough to swing
it wasn't decisive, no.
This result. I mean, are you a bit concerned that that was Matt Goodwin's first reaction? The party's now referred it to the police. Nigel Farage is talking about it. Shouldn't they just say,
Well, look, Sam Coates of Sky News. Take him if you're not willing to.
I think they massively overhyped it. But
but Sam Coates, he went door to door. And, he was meeting women, largely from the Muslim community, who said, I can't talk to you. My husband decides to vote in our household. Underlying that problem is a lack of integration in our society. And one of my reasons why I want to control immigration, one of the reasons why Reform wants to control immigration, is we used to be an integration superpower in Britain. We were basically a colourblind society.
It's massively under control now, isn't it? We're heading towards net zero.
But integration isn't under control. We are not an integrated society like we used to be. The fact that you saw in the Manchester by-election, Reform were way ahead with white people and Muslim people were voting much more for Green. We are voting in sectarian lines. Anyone who cares about a cohesive society must worry about that.
The actual reality of the results did not reflect that. As Zack was saying, our figures on Denton, and I was door knocking in Leventham, and virtually everyone I spoke to was white, and virtually everyone I spoke to was voting Green. In fact,
there were placards.
There were placards, all over these streets. So, the idea that you were the people who were suggesting there's some great division. Actually, on the streets, people live together every day. They go to school together every day. They share their lives, and they have different politics, different individuals in different places.
Well, we weren't the one that were running campaigns in separate languages with, I'm afraid, very divisive foreign policy figures trying to separate communities.
Well, what is the problem with separate languages? I mean, people do...
I've done European elections in London and put out leaflets in French.
I mean, when Mamdani did his campaigns in separate languages, people said, what a smart guy. Well, when it happens here...
I wouldn't. But the reason why I object to it, fundamentally, is I do believe that integration really matters. I think to be a British citizen is one of the proudest things you can have. And you cannot be fully integrated into any society if you do not speak fluently the language of the majority. And so what you're doing is that there is a real integration problem.
Last word, Sam. I mean, just on this whole question around, integration and what they call sectarianism in terms of sweeping up large groups of people on issues like Gaza.
So I think whenever you have an economy that is not growing very much and it's been flat, investment flat, productivity flat, living standards for about 15 years, the politics of division start to become easier. When you have a growing cake, it's easier for everyone to get better at the same time. So we are now living with an economy which is the bastard love child of Nigel Farage's Brexit and George Osborne's, failure to invest in productive economy. And it is going to be very, very difficult for this government to turn it around. It's going to take a decade. And until then, we need to hold off the extremes who are enjoying the division, stoking the division, and trying to persuade the British public, couldn't be worse than this. And actually, it could be a lot worse than this. A flat economy is not nearly as bad as what you'd get under populist left or populist right, where the real economy and people's living standards will shrink.
Sam White, Natalie Bennett, Tim Montgomery, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And that's the forecast for today. Until next time, bye-bye.